Hey everybody. Today, I'm going to talk about Isao Takahata's 1988 film, Grave of the Fireflies. Centering on two kids trying and ultimately failing to survive in World War II-era Japan, there's not a lot of movies that can be boiled down as easily as this one can. When I think about it, there are two sentences that immediately come to mind. First, it's good. It has beautiful animation, and it's well written, and it's worth anybody's time. Second, it's sad. It's like prohibitively, unremittingly sad. And, you know, there's something fun about describing a movie in such simple terms. At least there is for me. When we talk like this, Grave of the Fireflies becomes an event more than a story. It's like a chore. Most of the time you don't want to do it, but when it's done, you get to feel a bit accomplished. You sat through the good, sad movie. But as satisfying as it feels to understand the film this way, it also forecloses on our ability to understand it further. Grave of the Fireflies isn't just a parade of awful images. It's not just a visceral experience or a chore. It's a movie. And in this video, I want to talk about it as a movie. So let's get started. Part of what makes Grave of the Fireflies so interesting to me is the raw density of ideas that it wants to get across. The film has a relatively short runtime, and it's totally centered on the drama of its two main characters. And those things can lead a viewer to thinking that the movie has modest intentions, that it's exclusively about these kids and the struggles they face. But here, I want to impress upon you just how strangely packed this film really is. It's not just invested in exploring two characters, and it doesn't have one monolithic idea that it centers on. Rather, it explores a variety of thematic and emotional tensions, and it pushes its audience to grapple with a bunch of conflicting and upsetting ideas. Let me show you what I mean. First off, the most obvious idea the film is playing with is that beauty and innocence are, by their nature, fragile and short-lived. This idea is broadcasted by the title of the film, Grave of the Fireflies. It refers to a scene toward the middle of the movie, where Seita and Setsuko, our two main characters, decide to use fireflies to brighten up their cave.
Hey! Let's get as many as we can!
In the morning, all the flies are dead, and the audience has to come to terms with two facts that don't get along very well. First, fireflies are beautiful. Second, they don't live very long, and they're very delicate. The film gets a lot of mileage out of the juxtaposition between these two facts. See, at the beginning of the movie, when things are relatively okay for the kids, Seita makes a big deal out of preserving his mother's ring, tells Setsuko not to lose it.
Did she give it to me?
Just be careful you don't lose it.
And we're given the impression that this ring is gonna mean something. After all, it is their dead mother's most prized possession. After this scene, though, the ring is never spoken about again. It becomes unimportant to the characters and unimportant within the film's language. Instead of this ring, this symbol of permanence and stability, the movie focuses on another symbol, the fruit drops that Seita gives to Setsuko. Like the fireflies, these candies are able to give one brief, joyful experience to a kid that doesn't have much. And, like the fireflies, they are ephemeral and easily disposed of. And of course, we can connect these ideas to the characters themselves.
With a great big streamer, shaped like a carp in the wind. Go!
Seita and Setsuko's carefree childhood, blissful and fragile and temporary. Setsuko, a 4-year-old girl who's full of joy and wonder, blissful and fragile and temporary.
Stop it! Don't you realize that there's a war going on?
That said, the movie isn't happy to just present this tragedy of living, isn't happy to show us good things not lasting and saying, yeah, good things don't last. It also wants to ask a question. Why did any of these terrible things have to happen? Why is the world like this? And here we come to another major idea in the film. Who is to blame for the state of society? Who is responsible for Setsuko's death? Well, everybody. Everybody is. Let's take a minute and go over a list of things that happen in this movie. All the choices that people make that culminate in the loss of these children. The Japanese decide to bomb Pearl Harbor. The Americans decide to go to war and bomb the village where Seita and Setsuko live. When their mother dies, the kids move in with their aunt, who decides to treat them like second-class citizens. Because of this, Seita decides that he and his sister should go off on their own. Now they're starving. This farmer decides that he can't afford to sell them any more food. When Seita steals, this farmer decides to punish him brutally. A cop sees that Seita's in desperate need and even shows him some compassion. What does he decide to offer? A glass of water. Finally, a doctor looks at Setsuko, says she's malnourished, and decides to do nothing about it.
All this child needs is some food.
She needs food.
How can I help you?
Where am I supposed to get food?
My point here isn't that all these people are bad and evil, and look at what they did to these children. I mean, how much disdain can we have for people who don't have anything to spare? But again, the audience is presented with two seemingly contradictory facts and asked to make sense of them. First, the people in this society are struggling. In many cases, they're doing as much as they can to help others. Second, every single person that we meet makes a decision that results in the death of a child. Everybody is complicit. Everybody can be blamed, and most people did nothing wrong. But, of course, somebody does do something very wrong in Grave of the Fireflies. Someone makes a huge mistake. Anybody who's seen this film can remember the one obvious moment where the fates of the children are sealed. And that's the scene where Seita takes Setsuko, leaves his aunt's house, and heads off for the woods.
We've bothered you long enough. We should be leaving now.
You're leaving? For where?
Haven't really decided yet.
I find this moment really interesting to look at because it creates another sort of unexpected thematic tension. Looking at the awful way that the aunt treats our protagonists, it's natural to want one of two things to happen. Either one, the kids can change their situation and make it more livable, or two, the kids can escape their situation and find some better place for themselves. But in Grave of the Fireflies, neither of those gestures can really amount to anything. Seita and Setsuko are not able to change the problems of World War II-era Japan. Why would they be able to do that, you know? They're just children. And they're not able to escape that awful reality in a constructive way, either. Their attempt to leave their aunt's house and get off the grid only results in doom and starvation and despair. This theme is made explicit by a farmer toward the middle of the movie.
Then take my advice and go back to that woman, son. Everything's rationed now. You can't survive outside the system.
So here, we're introduced to another set of conflicting ideas. First, from Seita and Setsuko's perspective, the system is totally broken. Not only is there not enough food to go around in general, but also the woman who's supposed to take care of them is cruel and selfish. Second, they should have remained within that broken system. There was never any possibility of surviving without it. One more idea that the film asks us to chew on. At the very beginning of the movie, Seita dies in a train station. A guard notices that, thinks almost nothing of it, and then sees that around 2 feet away from Seita, another kid is dead.
This one's a goner too.
The obvious question we might ask looking at this random dead child is, what's his story? Why is he dead? And of course, the film provides no answer. This kid, whatever his name is on the outskirts of the story. We can't spend too long worrying about him. We have Seita and Setsuko's tragic lives to worry about. This becomes a sort of recurring image in the movie. One example that stands out to me is when the kids are on the beach having a great time when they see a dead person's foot.
Don't look at that.
Just as before, we are instructed to avert our gaze from this body. Its presence is chilling, but it doesn't really bother Seita, so it doesn't really bother me either. It's kinda just another object on the beach. Here, we have the final set of conflicting ideas that I'm gonna talk about. First, the things the protagonists in this movie face are heart-wrenching. They're tragic, and they can make us really sad. Second, there are a million stories that we can't be impacted by. As hard to watch as Grave of the Fireflies is, it doesn't last an eternity, right? It needs to direct our attention somewhere, and it's not on this person, and it's not on this person, and it's not on these people. Their lives will always be forgotten. So that's my brief survey of the thematic tensions in Grave of the Fireflies. You could probably frame all of them in a different way, and you could probably add one or two things to that list, but this is what I came up with. And when you present the film like this, isolating its themes and putting them in a sort of arbitrary order, the whole thing starts to feel a bit overwhelming, right? It starts to feel like the movie just wants to get at a bunch of interesting feelings, but doesn't really care about having an emotional or intellectual through line. But here, I want to suggest that there is a connective tissue linking the various ideas in the movie together. And it's a pretty interesting one, too. See, all four of the themes that I've talked about so far challenge a viewer's expectations of media and force them into a state of uncomfortable watching. It's normal when we see a movie to think that it'll end with a permanent, stable resolution. At the end of, say, a romantic comedy, we're supposed to think that our characters are happy now and will be happy forever. But Grave of the Fireflies says no. Happiness is fleeting, beautiful things are tragically fragile, and the only place where we might be able to experience anything forever is in death. It's normal in most movies to be able to blame the main conflict on one entity. Either there's some main antagonist or the protagonist has some issues they need to work out. Grave of the Fireflies says no. Everybody is to blame, everybody is complicit, and there is no one source of any problem. It's normal when we see a character who's in a bad system to expect our hero to change that system, or change themselves, or escape in some way. Grave of the Fireflies says no. Sometimes we need to stay in broken systems. Sometimes we have two choices: remain in a bad place or die trying to escape it. It's normal to expect a story to frame its main characters as the only things of importance, to imply that we are focusing on them for good reason. Grave of the Fireflies says no. There are countless tragedies we could have talked about, and there is something deeply incidental about the fact that we're talking about this one. And what does all this discomfort and shirking of expectations accomplish? How does it affect us as an audience? Well, it pushes us away. When I watch this movie, I can't ever really feel like I'm just watching Seita and Setsuko's lives unfold, because at every level of the film's thematic language, I'm challenged, expected to think about and problematize the way I'm consuming the story. There is no clean point of entry here, because we are constantly reminded that we're experiencing a text, one that's aware of its status as text, and which forces us to be aware of that status too. And what's interesting is that when I started thinking about the film as something that wants to push us away from our protagonists, I found that that gesture was central to the entire film, not just thematically, but also aesthetically and emotionally. Let's talk about the framing device that Grave of the Fireflies uses. I think it illustrates my point well. In the very first line of the movie, Seita tells us the date he died on.
September 21st, 1945. That was the night I died.
And since he's alone when he dies, we can extrapolate that Setsuko is dead too. From here on out, we're sort of following Seita's ghost as he watches his and his sister's final days unfold. It's hard to overstate the importance of this framing device to the movie as a whole. Honestly, it informs every second of my experience with it, and more than anything, it makes me feel detached from what's going on with our characters, removed from the action, and a bit numb. Like, there's all these scenes in the movie that could have very different emotional impacts. The sad moment where Seita tries to find food for his sister could feel very different from the comfortable one where they're happily eating white rice. The oppressive moment where their aunt is mistreating them could feel very different from the liberating one where they pack up and leave. And sure, these moments do feel different from each other, but the framing makes sure that they don't feel radically different. When I see them eating food, I think back to the scene where Seita gives his aunt his mother's silk, and how Seita's ghost recoils at how awful that decision was. When I see them going into the woods, there's no part of me that can relate to a feeling of childhood wonder and adventure, because it's so obviously a mistake. All I can think is, don't go, don't do it, you're both going to die because of this. The constant, unremitting sense of dread and despair that the movie evokes is the opposite of intimacy or immersion. Seita and Setsuko experience a million emotions in this movie. Joy, excitement, fear, oppression. But I don't feel those things. I feel bad and impotent 100% of the time. I feel bad and impotent when they're laughing on the beach, and I feel bad and impotent when Setsuko starves. And because I can never locate myself in the headspace of our characters, I am pushed away from them. My emotional experience is completely separate from theirs. There's one scene that I think brings this feeling of separation out better than any other. It's the one where a bunch of kids discover Seda and Setsuko's shelter in the woods.
Who'd want to eat that? Nobody I know would ever eat this stuff. Ground soybeans? And I thought the food I got was bad.
This scene fascinates me because it serves literally no purpose as far as the plot is concerned. The kids don't steal anything or break anything, and once they're gone, nobody ever talks about them again. Instead of moving the plot forward, this moment reinforces our position as an audience. We are these kids. Like them, we're just a bunch of people who stumbled onto a tragedy. We have the ability to look at what's happening and say, I guess my life isn't so bad after all. We can go here and feel bad for a second, and then, most importantly, we can leave. Here, as in many other places, the film challenges the act of watching, problematizes our ability to enter the text and understand what it means in any constructive way. After all, we are not Seda or his sister. Their lives and deaths are not for us to inhabit. All we can hope to be is observers on the margin, looking on from very far away. So, that was all I had to say about Grave of the Fireflies. This was actually super fun to make for me. I don't talk about a lot of capital M masterpieces on this channel, and I think doing that from time to time can be fun. At least I hope you liked it. There won't be a Patreon question of the week this time around because I didn't get one. So, let's turn the tables and I'll ask you a question. If you have a significant other, what's your favorite thing about them? And if you don't have a significant other, then what's your favorite thing about being single? I look forward to your responses. With that, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.